how this genetic data can be used to counter this whole argument of Aryan invasion?
So, genetics is not an independent line of evidence. That's the first thing I want to say. In my talks, I extensively give ideas about genetic methodology. Genetic methodology believes that each of us carry in our DNA mutations of all our ancestors on the maternal side and paternal side. So the idea is that if I take a sufficiently large number of genetic samples, maybe by looking at the mutations different people have, I can try to classify who are the different people. So that is one idea that genetics can probably offer. But then the idea is also extended to migrations, ancient migrations, and how people moved from one part of the world to the other. And I have problems with that methodology. So genetics makes use of saliva swabs. It tries to get all the genetic data out of a person, the genome of a person, by sequencing and other such things. Then it goes through a process of a bioinformatician who writes the models for, if I say, for example, that we are mixed with the Central Asian DNA, there has to be a mathematical model for that. So the bioinformatician, who is a statistician, he will try to say, okay, this is the model of Central Asia, this is the model of Indians at that time. They mixed in some percentage and so many generations are there. And today's Indians have got the current measurements of DNA because such a mixing happened in the past. So they might have some ancient samples from Harappa. They might have some ancient samples from Central Asia. They'll take those DNA samples. They'll have some estimates in their mathematical models and they'll try to do this. Unfortunately, this is a deeply mathematical exercise which is not known to the common person. A specialist would be able to go and critique many things in the mathematical models, starting with the model itself, going on to the algorithms that they use, going on to initialization, going on to the assumptions that they build into this. There are deep problems over there. The bottom line is, when the results come from genetics, it is not an absolute measure with high degree of confidence. Rather, one must take those claims very, very narrowly because they are restricted in their applicability. The situation is like this, sir. Today we are in a certain central place in Hyderabad. And if I say I want to go to Google Map and say I want to go from here, central Hyderabad, I want to go to the airport. Google Map will say you can go by that route, you can go by this route, you can go by this route, this will take 20 minutes more, there's an accident on this road, that will take 1 hour less, different routes it will give. All 3 roads will take you there. But the question is, which road are you going by? So you might choose one road. Just because you chose that road does not make it correct.
Make it the right route.
Correct. So this is the problem over here also. So over here, they choose constraints to fit the linguistic model. Linguistic model gives them a time boundary for the mixing. Linguistic model says 1500 BCE. So they will assume about so many generations. If 50 years is one generation, they'll take about so many generations from there to here, 40 generations, 50 generations, and so on. And they'll try to fit their models to that. So it will converge to that model because you assume that. Just because it converges does not give you proof of Aryan invasion or any such thing. So this is my problem with the genetic model. It is not an absolute science. It's a relative science which claims should be taken very, very narrowly.
That's the reason why Karunanidhi, a Sanskritized name, with a Sanskritized name, names his daughter as Kanimori.
Right.
Removing the Sanskrit part.
Right.
But then this is also where the roots of the Periyar movement, which is even now actually very divisive, very noxious.
And I always tell people the same thing. You tell me the names of at least 100 Indian authors, any period of time, whether you want to start with Yajnavalkya in 3000 BC or whether you want to go with Madhava in 13th century, 14th century, not a single author has talked about Dravidians or Aryans. So thousands of years in this country, whether Sangam literature in the south or whether you go to other literature in Eastern India, Western India, Northern India, nobody is talking about invasion. No invasion, no migration, no suppression, no nothing. However, these people have a noxious idea that Aryan invasion happened and so on. So the whole philosophy, the whole identity is bogus. This Dravidian identity is utterly bogus as the Aryan notion is. So that is the central thesis that I come.
It's not just the Aryan Dravidian dogma, it is also about hiding a part or obscuring a part of history. They have. Did you do some research on how this 1,000 years have been obscured in the name of Sandrakotas?
Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely. So, if you read the works of Kota Venkatachalam, for example, he brings this out very well. So, he says in the early debates that these Britishers had, they wanted to find how does the history of India relate to the Western history. There's no relation. They could not find any relation. So, they wanted an anchor point. To find that anchor point, they looked at, there was a person called Megasthenes who was supposed to have visited India, and he wrote a work called Indica. That work is lost, but portions of that work survive in other texts, so they're using that. In that work, he referred to a ruler called Sandrakotos. So they tried to see who is this Sandrakotos. So they looked at the Purana king list and they said phonetically somebody called Chandragupta Maurya sounds close to Sandrakotos. So they made an anchor point saying Chandragupta Maurya, Sandrakotos, and aha, we have got a relationship now. 300 BCE, this is a time frame for Sandrakotos, Chandragupta Maurya, and that's how we know relationship to Western history. There were some 3 kings mentioned, Ashoka's time, all these kind of things. The problem is the Puranas have placed this Chandragupta Maurya 1200 years earlier. Almost 1,000 years earlier. So there is a distortion that they introduced just by making such an anchor point. So the Purana king list earlier had perfect synchronism. Whether you take Nepal king list, Kashmir king list, Purana king list, everything had synchronism. Perfect agreement was there. After the British finished all these rearranging of the list, synchronism has been lost totally. Even today, we cannot reconcile the king list that history is telling us from the British history with our traditional history. So we can't do that because it's been totally lost. And they have labeled them as unreliable, corrupt, and all these kind of things.
The point here is, have there never been any attempts to correct this distortion anywhere during the Indian history during the last 200 years?
So there have been some nationalist people throughout in different times. For example, Bala Gangadhar Tilak was one of them who was trying to.
He too has proposed that Aryans are
Very true. So he was a product of his times. He was a product of his times where he strongly also believed the British line that there was an Aryan invasion, and he tried to see where did the Aryans come from, and he tried to say from Arctic Ocean. Arctic Circle, from that area they came. So that was his theory. But he made some mistakes. But he was a nationalist writer.
But Kota Venkatachalam has actually opposed this. He wrote a book called Aryula Dhruva Nivasa Khandanamu. The polar origin of Aryans was challenged by Kota Venkatachalam.
Correct. So I have encountered the Kota Venkatachalam's works in English because I cannot read Telugu. So in his English works, I'm very, very impressed. He's my teacher also. I've learned a lot from his works. So when I say pranams to my gurus, he's also one of the gurus that I give pranams to. So yes. So he's challenged some of these ideas. He's presented this synchronism problem about the astronomy problem. He brings in the astronomy, he brings in the time of Yudhishthira's era, he brings in various ideas. Some of those ideas we can discuss. Not all researchers will be on the same page. We can discuss these ideas and we can do that. But the point is, he challenged it. Nobody else was there who challenged these ideas over there, but he challenged 1950s or so, he challenged this narration of history. Unfortunately, in Nehruvian India, I don't think there was any attempt to even connect with the ancient civilization. Not even to bring in Sanskrit as a medium of instruction. The JPC that was there at that time, they rejected the idea of Sanskrit being a medium of instruction. It's been downhill after that, after Indira Gandhi took power and gave power to the Marxists.
The Marxists have infiltrated into the educational system, into the formulation of the syllabus and everything.
It has been utterly downhill after that. So today there are several people like me who are challenging these things based on science and other narratives. So we hope there will be a sufficient upswell of interest that we can change the narratives.
మా వేకప్ ఇండియా .tv లేటెస్ట్ అప్డేట్స్ ముందుగా మీకు రావాలనుకుంటే సబ్స్క్రైబ్ చేసుకోండి. అలాగే పక్కనున్న బెల్ ఐకాన్ ను క్లిక్ చేస్తే ఆల్, పర్సనలైజ్డ్, నన్ అనే ఆప్షన్స్ వస్తాయి. అందులో ఆల్ అనే ఆప్షన్ పై క్లిక్ చేయండి.